Showtime. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hardfire Media Liberal Conversations, a series of screen media programs we are doing to discuss current events and to help us get through this unique time of lockdown and unprecedented state exercise of power in certain places. The idea for this series comes from classical liberalism, which is based on free speech, freedom of religion, and equal rights under law. These discussions are available on our Hardfire YouTube channel. This is our 8th liberal discussion. My name is Cameron Weber. I'm an economist and historian and the producer of Hardfire Media. And this is our liberal discussions conversation during the national emergency. Last week, we introduced the concept of the shallow us versus them politics in the depersonalized, imagined nation state, something we have referred to as a false dichotomy, the us versus them cartel two-party political system. Now we are going to get into more on the protests. Today's topic, the protests. Second part on the protests, Mandarin, and this is Cantonese, which is going on in protests in China. Today, and I'll start upper left-hand corner, we've got Brett, and if you want to know more about us, who's appearing on the show, you can see our previous episodes. Today we'll do more content and not so much introduction. In the upper left-hand corner, we have Bradley Maurer from Queens, John Clifton from Queens, New York, Francisco Aldape from Brooklyn, New York, Derek Sacerdote from Brooklyn, New York, and I'm in Brooklyn. We're all in different parts of Brooklyn and all in different parts of Queens. And we also have Starchild from San Francisco. Are you still there?
I am here.
All right. For more information on our guests, please see our previous show. Thank you for participation on today's show. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Freedom. Good to be here.
Yeah, appreciate it. So, like I said, I'm feeling a little bit of the coronavirus, but the show must go on. And we got Greg Smith from Australia has not joined us. So let's get right to it. We left off last time with the proposal that both the anti-lockdown and police brutality protests are related, that people are just sick of the ever-intruding state. John Clifton, who is concerned about the militarization of civilian society, mentioned that we should look into the funding of Black Lives Matter. And Starchild and John differ as to the spontaneity of the police brutality protests. We'll look at that later. First, we have some unfinished business. Derek had mentioned that the two cartel political parties want to see businesses fail for different reasons. You want to tell us about that, Derek? You think they both want to see businesses fail? Or?
I think what you're referring to is the left. If businesses fail, that makes Trump look bad. If things are going too well, they feel that would make his re-election more likely. Whereas on the right, if businesses fail and people are unemployed due to businesses failing, they're not paying unemployment in the same way because they did not force them to be unemployed. They're simply unemployed because their business failed. So there's very different reasons. I think that's what you're referring to.
Well, the left also likes. Oh, okay, sure. I was going to. I think what most of us are concerned about, at least myself, is the far left and the far right. It seems like the people stuck in the middle are stuck in the middle. Here's the gig work dissolves in puddle of red ink from the New York Times. Gig work dissolves in a puddle of red ink. New York Times, May 8th. And you'll see I've circled
May 8th?
May 8th. Uber and Lyft and Airbnb. And I've been studying this stuff for a while. Airbnb, Uber, and Lyft are gig economy. They're hard to tax. They're hard to organize. They're hard to unionize. And so therefore and hard to tax. And so therefore the state would like, the hotel workers unions and the treasury departments and the city revenue departments and the labor unions. They don't like Airbnb and Lyft because they're hard to unionize and tax. So I think that's why the left might want to see some businesses fail. And another example of that is, I don't know what left and right means, to be honest, but unions and states want to see Airbnb and Lyft fail. And same thing with the currency. The currency, Bitcoin was declared an asset, so you have to pay capital gains taxes on Bitcoin. So that limits the competition against the fiat paper dollar.
And the Airbnb began exploding. What I began hearing was that people didn't feel that these gig work provided enough worker protections and enough benefits.
Exactly.
So that they thought these were ways of employers to sort of get around the mandate.
Exactly. Yeah.
The way to put it is the government couldn't get its cut, and they couldn't figure out a way to force its way into getting a cut from some of these newer businesses. And so they're blackballing them or calling them, disadvantageous workers and all the rest.
Yeah, even though it's you can work whenever you want. It's not 9 to 5 and all that kind of stuff. So it's
I think what your point you're making, John, is it was not the workers who were actually doing the complaining.
Mm-hmm.
Outsiders who were complaining about the working conditions.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's always some complaints from whatever sector, but I'm just saying it may be ulterior motives, as previously
yeah.
Government is going after gig workers.
It's gig, yeah. I mean, we're gig workers right now. Lyft, Uber, and Airbnb are struggling as coronavirus keeps the world at home, right? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I would quickly point out that it isn't coronavirus that's keeping the world at home. It's the government response to COVID-19, and a lot of stuff gets blamed on the virus itself that is actually the fault of the government. Authorities shutting down the economy and mandating people close their businesses and all this kind of thing.
Some businesses and not others. Yeah, we did a program on essential services and the arbitrary rule of law. One of the reasons I've invited Star Child on the show is because a long time ago, I don't remember if you remember this, Star Child, maybe like a month ago, I was saying about the essential services or the lockdown or psychological lockdown, and you said, oh, it's not, it's just oh yeah, and we compared it with the AIDS, and you said no, it's nothing like AIDS. This is just, and I read in The Economist that it's just having 1 year's worth of flu in a month.
Yeah, well, it is a worse than usual case of flu, I would say. I mean, right now, the latest I heard, and this was just like a day or two, it was reported that worldwide deaths from the coronavirus are up to, I think they said like 490,000. And the flu, from the estimates I saw before, kills an estimated 290 to 600,000 people a year. So, we're looking right now at COVID-19 being in the upper end of the range for flu worldwide. It's been a little bit worse than average in the United States compared to the rest of the world. So for the United States, right now it might be like a particularly bad year of flu, but it's not like AIDS. It's not like the Spanish flu epidemic that killed millions. It's certainly not like car accidents or, government wars. That have killed a hell of a lot more. I mean, the democide, governments killing their own people, is the number one worldwide cause of preventable death in the past century, by far. Hundreds of millions.
I read someplace that actually SARS was a much more dangerous virus than the coronavirus was. It's just we handled it better.
I don't know if those are riots going on right now.
I may be wrong, but I thought I saw that someplace.
Well, I saw my first Black Lives Matter violence. Like I said, the director of the show is not here because she's working at the polls right next to the Brooklyn Library, and we're walked by the entrance of the Brooklyn Library, children's entrance, and they have this really nice LED sign, and it looked like somebody threw a bowling ball at it, and right at the children's entrance of the Brooklyn Library, and then there was a sign behind it that said Black Lives Matter. And so, you know, was that staged by the right, or was it actually done by Black Lives Matter?
What's confusing to me I think what confused a lot of people is that Black Lives Matter, just like defund the police, these were initially hashtags that were used while protesting. And then from being hashtags, they became, now we think of them as organizations and movements. So we got to be clear what we're talking about. We're talking about people who simply use the hashtag as a way to get their message across, or are they the official organization associated with that hashtag?
Yeah, Derek is Mr. Social Media, I think, compared to most of us. Derek does a lot of.
Well, that's a very good point, because groups like Black Lives Matter and Antifa and Anonymous, you know, these are not organized groups. The protesters in Seattle that have occupied the so-called Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, you know, they aren't organized groups. And so if people talk about, oh, these people did this, you know, it can be misleading. Derek's point is well taken.
You and John are going to have a discussion on that once we cover these preliminaries here. Let's see. Let's see. The lack of monetary competition has helped allow the decade-long easy money, which has allowed the U.S. government to double the debt in 5 years by paying below-market interest rates on bonds. This has allowed the state to declare some businesses essential, mostly services provided the state and large firms with political connections. And we talked about the corporatization, the potential corporatism like Italy in the 1930s that this could lead to. And then bail out certain businesses while passing on debt to those yet born under our supposed democracy.
It was actually Mussolini, Italian dictator, who once said that a good name for fascism was corporatism.
Yeah,
so that's basically what we're talking about.
pretty much.
You know, some political freedom or some economic freedom rather for businesses, but as long as they sort of serve the interests of the state in a broad sense, they're allowed to operate.
Everybody else just marches along in line and has suffering social and economic mobility. Derek, in addition, you wanted to address how the anti-lockdown protests are depicted in social media by the virtue signaling outrage culture chattering class.
Well, yeah, I think it seems almost dated now. That seems so 3 weeks ago. We were talking about the protest in Michigan.
And then we can't keep up with the Michigan one.
The anti-lockdown protests. Yeah, they were being depicted very harshly on social media as a sort of protest of white privilege. That it's a bunch of people who had nothing worse to complain about than their hair salon being closed, who turn out for more serious social issues, but are moved to come outside with guns for this. And the entire anti-lockdown movement was characterized in that manner on social media.
So and right, okay. That's
I would agree emphatically with that, and I would say that the main purpose, it seems, of modern social media, the top firms like Twitter and whatnot, is as efficient online organizing tools for the professional left, or in some cases the professional right, in producing whatever event comes along to steer it toward promoting their message. And it's just like he mentioned with Black Lives Matter was originally just a phrase. It was just a hashtag along with defund the police. And that's the phrase, or maybe a focus group tested expression that has such widespread popularity in the polls.
yeah.
That's not the same thing as the organized professional group, Black Lives Matter, that appropriated the term and is, you know, behind the organization of all these protests and demonstrations.
Well, people, including Alicia Garza here in Oakland, came up with the Black Lives Matter hash phrase. You know, they're still described as leaders of the movement. I don't know actually if they have started a formal organization with the name Black Lives Matter, but I think it's not like some people were using hashtag and then other people came along and appropriated it. Really, it's just a lot of the same people and people concerned about the issue who are involved in both using the hashtag and protesting, I think.
I think there's definitely overlap in that Venn diagram. There's some people who see it as a movement and also an organization.
Yeah, I'm gonna get out of the way here in just a second. I wanted to talk about police brutality and reform for a second. So here's the Economist. Here's New York, June 6th through the 12th, and I sent John a copy of this. I don't know if you got it on text, but they're talking about, in Chicago, for instance, officers do not have to provide a statement to investigators until 24 hours after a shooting. Jenny Harteau, a former police chief in Minneapolis, complained that the union had union-mandated arbitrators reinstated officers that she wanted to fire. Minneapolis' union skirted a ban that Jacob Frey, the city's mayor, imposed on warrior-style training for police officers. John's concern about militarization. Many blame such training, along with the steady flow of military-style weapons from the Pentagon's surplus weapons giveaways, for fostering police militarization. Among other goodies, the Pentagon's program gave the police department that serves Los Angeles public schools 3 grenade launchers in 2014. The district returned them, though it kept 61 rifles and a mine-resistant armored vehicle. A paper by Political Science found that police militarization fails to enhance public safety while also eroding public trust in the police. That's what I had to say about that. Or the
I didn't read that article, but I have been familiar with similar articles over the years. And there's a problem, as I said, with understanding the nature of what a classical liberal or libertarian objection would be to aggressive policing versus the issue of what is causing the current state of turmoil with all the protests and demonstrations. There are cases of Black suspects being overly or over-aggressively engaged with by police across the nation. But in terms of total statistic, it's not, in my opinion, a issue of racial division. It's more of an issue of that's where cops are trained, from New York to San Francisco to Minneapolis to Atlanta, and it translates into an overly aggressive response to a suspect. And it leads to a course of judicial follow-up when those cops are tried or disciplined, or an attempt is made to discipline them, where most people accused of police brutality in the police force are acquitted because they can justify their activity based on the existing protocol they were under, that they were some things that they were supposed to do or expected to do when engaging suspects. And that we, as people who are supposed to be principally opposed to over-aggressive government or over-large government, should be focusing on that and the over-militarized training protocols that seem to be standing policy with too many police forces across the nation, instead of the left-wing issue of blaming it all on race, or the right-wing issue of deifying cops and saying they never do anything wrong. That's why I was trying to get it focused in the right direction as far as our point of view is concerned.
John, last time you said you didn't believe there was any systemic racism in the U.S. Did you say that?
I did, and I said that, and based on my understanding again of statistics, but that there are different sets of statistics depending on who's done the research. I know by the Washington Post's own, they have a running database on it, and along with some other organizations like Bureau of Justice and such, that there are roughly like 1,000 to 1,100 incidents each year of armed police attacking and killing suspects that are unarmed. 85% of that, according to the Post's own database, and according to the other sources, is armed white officers engaging over aggressively white suspects. Of the 15% that's left, you got, 90% of that is a black officer attacking an unarmed white suspect. And then the last 10% consists of an armed white officer attacking and or killing a black unarmed suspect.
Yeah, so you're talking about the police statistics, not society writ large.
I know, but that shows you that statistically, in terms of the direct subject we're talking about, I mean, absolute numbers, there's only like around 15 people per year who are black unarmed suspects who are being attacked by the police.
But I've seen
I thought it was relevant to the discussion.
On Facebook.
Huh?
I've seen 15 in the past week on Facebook. It just seems it's not consistent with the smartphone videos that we've
Unarmed
seen.
black suspect killed by white officers.
Yeah.
And that the key issue there is what category are we talking about? Obviously, there's an issue with 1,100 or so situations every year where cops are killing, unarmed suspects, and you can go through them case by case to find out if it was justified or not, or what the motives were. But I'm saying the fragment of that is racial is small and does not justify designation of the issue as an issue of systemic racism any more than.
John, you mentioned the Washington Post a minute ago. You mentioned the Washington Post a minute ago, and I as some of you on the call know, I sent an article that has a great deal of statistics and evidence on the racial bias in policing from the Washington Post. I'll just read one just brief part of it here. It said an August 2019 study published by the National Academy of Sciences based on police shooting databases found that between 2013 and 2018, black men were about 2.5 times more likely than white men to be killed by police, and that black men have a 1 in 1,000 chance of dying at the hands of police. Black women were 1.4 times more likely to be killed than white women. Latino men were 1.3 to 1.4 times more likely to be killed than white men. And it goes on. There's much more in this article by Bradley Maurer, who's a libertarian, who was published or updated by the Washington Post in June 2020. So, well, I would agree with John that I think that the overall issue here, and it's a worldwide issue, and that is police power, abuse of power. But it does often have a racist, structural racist, as well as classist, anti-poor, that is, component to it. And I don't think we should ignore either of those components, while at the same time, as John was mentioning, the main libertarian point is, power corrupts and power is going to be abused, and we need to cut back government power so it's not abused against people of any race.
Well, and The Economist magazine tells us that you can't, even if a police officer does abuse their power, you can't fire them because the union arbitrator won't allow you to do that.
We've got some great legislation by Libertarian Congressman Justin Amash, now the first Libertarian member of Congress ever. He's introduced something called the Ending Qualified Immunity Act, which would remove some of this legal protection for police officers and other government agents, which he's got in there as well in the legislation that hasn't been covered much by the media. But I think it's a terrific bill and historic as the first ever piece of libertarian legislation introduced in Congress. So it's HR 7085. I would encourage everyone listening and watching to call your member of Congress or write them both. Tell them to please support Amash's HR 7085. There's also a number of other good police reforms in Congress by Democrats that have been all referred to the House Judiciary Committee along with Amash's bill that are worth supporting, in my opinion, like banning the use of chemical weapons such as tear gas, ending mandatory minimum sentences, and some other good reforms.
Great. So, okay, John. Okay, now let's get on to the police brutality protests, Black Lives Matter movement, and the protests. Of course, our current president enjoys inflaming this situation to create the age-old divide and conquer towards getting reelected, and the other party enjoys these protests as they build voter reaction against the incumbent. John and Starchild differ on the spontaneity of the police brutality protests. In the last, you're right, so you differ on the spontaneity of the police brutality protests, and I guess that's our big topic right now. Let's talk about the Black Lives Matter and the anti-brutality protests How well organized are they?
I don't know if this photo reads well as a copy from what you call it,
Yeah. That's it. That's
that's from this Sunday, as we're just taping this after the event. But the Brooklyn Museum had a Black Lives Matter protest. It had like something like 10,000 or so, or I don't even know how to count the number of people there, but they weren't socially distanced, and they weren't for a large part wearing masks. And I'm saying that's not all people who just like to tweet or retweeted something. That took organization. That took people calling people up, and people were organizing to get there at a particular point. If you look at the history of where Black Lives Matter comes from, or where its money comes from, that's where a lot of this issue of what is this group comes from, where the mystery, that is. Someone have pointed out that Black Lives Matter, according to a 990 IRS form from the last time they submitted a tax form to the government, has somebody listed named Robert Barnes as someone who's an executive behind it. And who is Robert Barnes? Nobody knows. He doesn't appear on their website. And what is his role in handling their money? Why is it when you go to the donation page of Black Lives Matter, you get to something called Act Blue? And we research what Act Blue is, and you find out it funds various major campaigns of candidates promoted by the Democratic National Committee. So basically, Black Lives Matter in that regard acts as a money pump to fund the DNC. You look at, well, where did the Project Veritas, is a conservative candid camera type organization, they infiltrated one of the organizations of Antifa and found out that they freely acknowledged that the money coming to Black Lives Matter and Antifa is coming from George Soros and Steyer, one of the Democratic presidential candidates. This implies to me that, as I theorized previously, that it's possible for the same benefactor who's giving them a lot of the structural money they need to operate is operating them separately and telling one group to demonstrate peacefully and the other group to raise mayhem, and tell the mayhem group that, oh, you'll be covered by the peaceful protesters. Whenever somebody complains about the violent disasters going on, somebody will say, oh, well, most of the protesters are peaceful. Because you got the same guy funding both sides in order to create a situation where you can't easily blame the violent group for their actions. That was my theory.
Simply to get elected.
Well, this all sounds very
without understanding how desperately they want to get rid of Trump. That seems to be the underlying.
Very conspiratorial, but if you posit that, well, this is all just organized people on the left, or a few rich people like George Soros trying to get rid of Trump. Well, it doesn't explain how the protests are worldwide. I mean, there's major protests going on over police abuse and racism in Australia and Brazil and the UK and other places, and this isn't the first time these kinds of issues have come up. I mean, the whole Arab Spring uprising in the Middle East about a decade ago that toppled two dictatorships was started by a government official hassling a fruit vendor in Tunisia. And people had just had enough of this kind of arrogant, abusive treatment by police, and it sparked protests and riots and popular uprisings. And I think, there's been the same thing in the United States. I mean, going back to the Ferguson killing of Michael Brown a couple of years ago, you had big protests there and other places in the country. Going back further, you had the Rodney King protests and riots in Los Angeles in 1992. I don't think this is some top-down organized thing. I mean, I hear the same thing about, on the left, of leftists complaining about, oh, these, billionaire Koch brothers on the right are funding this and that, and they've got their hands and everything, and it's all just astroturf, and nobody actually cares about ending lockdowns. It's just a bunch of paid right-wing, organizers. I thought that was bosh, too. It just didn't make any sense to me.
I'm pointing out that the Chauvin incident, where the officer knee choked the individual, George Floyd, happened on a Monday, or became big news May 25th. And by the end of that week, you had massive protests going on in 6 or 7 different cities that were extremely well organized simultaneously. And I'm just saying to someone, again, who had organized protests in the past, myself, that you can't do that kind of organization without help. George Soros has tens of billions of dollars, and that's enough to fund a lot of organizations, including around the world, who will take advantage of a local incident that coincides with their, agenda to trigger, a pre-organized riot or demonstration. I tend to think that some of these previous events, whether it was Smollett's attempt to create the atmosphere for a race riot the other year, failed, and as a result, they had to wait until a more believable incident happened in order to do what they did. That's just how I explain how there's this worldwide phenomenon. There are groups and individuals who are waiting for such an event in order to then do a phone tree on a more bigger scale than we can understand some around here, and start.
Well, I think that's true for every incident that comes along. I mean, people on all sides of the perspective of the political spectrum try to use all kinds of incidents in order to, get their message out and their pre-existing views. This is not surprising or unique to the Black Lives Matter or anything like that. But on the other hand, when there's something all over the news and a lot of people are upset about it, and rightfully so, it doesn't take a lot of money or organization to get people out in the streets. I mean, it can be very spontaneous. Like in 1979 in San Francisco, or 78, I think, when Harvey Milk was assassinated, the famous gay rights leader, who's a member of the Board of Supervisors here, gays were immediately out in the streets, and there were big riots. A bunch of police cars got smashed. It was not, and that's been very well discussed and documented in the queer liberation movement history, but there was not a lot of top-down organizing. There was spontaneous community anger at what had happened. And Dan White, actually, the incident that triggered it was the guy that assassinated Harvey Milk got off basically with a slap on the wrist, and his excuse was he had eaten too many Twinkies. He came down as the Twinkie defense, and people were just outraged that that would be allowed to excuse his killing of somebody. Two people actually also killed him there.
I just want to quickly bring in one other example of what I'm talking about. If you don't have to believe me, you don't have to believe Star Child, you can go to Wikipedia and look up the entry on the Ku Klux Klan or the neo-Nazis in America. Those are clearly, unequivocally white extremist groups. And you can find out that they record the estimated numbers of such groups in the United States. Ku Klux Klan has 3,000 to 6,000 members, depending on whether you believe the ADL's numbers or the Southern Poverty Law Center's numbers. The numbers of neo-Nazis in this country number in the hundreds. In other words, we're only talking about a few thousand people in a country that has 330 million people. That's not an evidence to me of systemic racism.
Let me ask this.
Well, I think most people that are racist don't necessarily go out and join the neo-Nazis or the Ku Klux Klan as part of an organized group. I don't think. I think a lot of racist practices get incorporated and mixed in with classist practices and others by government. So I don't think it's as simple as just measuring the membership of extremist groups.
Right.
It's some kind of indicator that there's not that much commitment to go that far to join such groups, and they don't really take up that much of the American landscape to be drafting a theory about them being all over the place.
Racists may just feel it's not effective to join the Klan. It's more effective to support Donald Trump.
Well, that's only if you want to slander half of the country as being racist extremists, and that's the aim.
I'm not saying everybody that supports Trump has that motivation, but I think he does have some support among racists, as some people do on the left. I'm sure Biden has some support among black racists and racists of other groups, but it's not demeaning the motives of everybody who supports Trump by any means. But I don't think it's any big secret or controversy that he's made and said a number of racist things, and that attracts support from people with those kind of values and beliefs. So.
Okay, and one point I just complete that I didn't finish before was that every year you have lots of car accidents around the country, If you add them up compared to the number of safe driving incidents, it's a small amount. It's not evidence of systemic incompetence in driving to point out the fact that there are car accidents. Just so,
Right.
in the same manner, just because there are unequivocally race incidents in this country, including with the police, it does not prove by itself any systemic occurrence of that as an issue.
Let me hear from.
I would agree with that.
What would actually be the proof? Because it seems like it's a very subjective call, no matter how you
Well,
want to define it.
In San Francisco, there was a so-called texting scandal a couple of years ago when the public defender, in going after another police scandal, they subpoenaed some of the phone records of a bunch of officers, and they found a significant group of officers. I think it was at least a dozen were involved with this. Were exchanging racist and homophobic text messages among themselves. It showed that it was, pretty ingrained into the culture of this police department. And I think there have been some indicators in other police departments as well of these kinds of views and so forth. So again, I don't think it should eclipse the issue of abuse of power, but I do think there's a strong racial element. And I think libertarians should be glad that people are pointing out that government racism. And it isn't even just limited to this guy named Richard Rothstein, who's written a book basically about the history of zoning laws and title deed restrictions that just a few decades ago greatly favored white people being able to get home loans and move into certain areas, and black people were prevented from these things. And it helped create the concentration of blacks in inner city neighborhoods while whites moved out to suburbs and so forth. People think this is like a spontaneous thing, but a lot of it was actually racist stuff built into government laws. And libertarians should point out that history of government being racist and that being the source of a lot of these problems.
The state, okay. Wow, I don't think we're going to resolve this. But it's been a good debate. Francisco, I know that George Soros' organization is all over the world. I was in the Foreign Service, and he had an office across the street from where I lived in Almaty, Kazakhstan. Greg Smith wasn't able to join us. What do you think is why would Soros want to create race war? Francisco, you're familiar with George Soros, right?
Yeah, well, I remember that he was the one that broke the Bank of England in the early 90s, right?
He feels guilty about it, and I guess he wants to spend his money doing good things. I don't know why a race war would be a good thing.
Well, no, I think actually I do understand, and I also agree that with Star Child, this sounds like a conspiratorial. It's a conspiracy theory. And I heard of this coming, from Mexico. I also know some Mexican analysts who tend to associate, Soros and people like that because, for instance, the person that I speak with, he always complains that Soros has his puppets in Mexico, right, to kind of like handle the Mexican population or, the pseudo intellectuals. But I just want to take a step back, and I also, I think that more than, I understand where the conspiracy theories are coming from, but I think it would be more helpful, also to get away from this, like left, right, and always, like I understand also that you have, in some ways we have to label and, certain positions, but that doesn't take us too far to try to understand, what's going on in the world if we just, like saying, oh, the left, the right, and all these conspiracy theories. But, in many ways, why don't we ask ourselves, why is there so much, like just to militarize the police? Why is there so big of a police influence in the United States, right? I was reading an article by, actually, this economist, Samuel Bowles and Jayarev, which is, actually the title of the article is One Nation Under Guard. So, they raise this issue that, there's been an increase in private security guards as much as, even way more than high school teachers in the nation. So why is this, right? You have to, I guess, wonder why the U.S. as a country has so much to be afraid of to have all these, like security guards, gated communities, policemen all around, the corners. So, but yeah, that's just the point that I wanted to make.
Yeah.
Good. Francisco.
Bradley, do you have anything? We're way over time, so let's just do some concluding comments.
Being educated tonight, which is better than speaking sometimes. So,
what do you think of the? Why would somebody want to spend their money to create racial hatred?
in the case of Soros, bring the United States.
Just anybody would
Bring the United States down. Change the world order.
bring the U.S. down. Yeah.
Yeah, and then kind of shift balance.
That would happen probably by itself. The gravity.
Well, that could be too, but he has the money to. If I had $10 billion, what would I do with it?
Oh, just to
Right, you know what I'm saying? What would you do with $10 billion?
Catch them under your bed or your mattress.
Yeah, I guess. Or I was going to stabilize a country or two. Why not?
But let's go wrap up by John Clifton's point about libertarian, which is what, John? What are the two principles?
Well, initiation of force and being opposed to the use of force and fraud to solve problems. At least introducing that into your so-called solution. I would say there's a structural or a communication aspect where we try to define issues in terms of problem, the principle, the solution, and transition. Where you acknowledge that there's a certain problem, but it does not necessarily mean we have to sign on to more government as a solution, more taxes, more force, and so on.
And my point was this unionization thing.
Well, yeah, but that would be one of the issues right now. The
special treatment under law. So it's an issue.
Yeah, what the union is there to do is to protect its workers or whatever its workers are. In this case, I think Chauvin in the Floyd case is a cop who may get actually acquitted of murder one based on the way these things go. In the Minneapolis police training manual, it is authorized to put your knee on the neck of a resisting suspect. And I think it's going to go to trial, and they're going to say you're guilty of premeditated murder, and the defense attorney is going to say, nope, look at the training manual. It says he could do this, and that's going to create enough reasonable doubt to get an acquittal, just like it does in whatever it is, 90 some other cases where cops are accused of brutality. They can always point to existing procedure that they were following.
Yeah, particularly.
Well, I do think we as libertarians should say that, regardless of what any government orders somebody might be given or what it might say in their government training manual or whatever, people who act on behalf of the government or any other organization are still individually morally accountable for what they do. It's like I was just doing my job and I was just following orders. These were not defenses at Nuremberg, the Nazi war trials, and they shouldn't be defenses now either. I think people should be held accountable for what they do.
True, but would that work to find someone guilty in court? Because on court of law, we're not going by moral code, we're going by legal code.
Well, you might be right as far as practically what happens. I was just making more of a point about what I think we as libertarians should want to happen and should demand, basically.
Or just a number. So why don't we wrap that up? I call it classical or liberal discussion, classical liberalism. I call it just to separate it from the Libertarian Party to try to make things not so political. I just don't like being bossed around.
Yeah. Well, there's a bigger libertarian movement. The Libertarian Party is just a small part of it.
Yeah. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming on the show, and very good discussion. Sorry if it's a little too long, but we did our best.
Oh, it was great. I learned a lot from all these interactions, and it was better to have them than
It was Derek's idea to address the protests straight head on, and we have one protest, and then they segued into another one, and so I'm glad we did that. So,
next up, we're gonna discuss the vaccine of the coronavirus. If it's gonna
oh,
the rebound of the economy.
as
The,
long,
the economy is reopening now, so
as long as the,
probably we'll see if coronavirus was all, it starts to go down. It starts to go. I think China already started closing their schools again, so there is another
yeah,
lockdown in there. And I don't think we're gonna be teaching physically in the next fall.
that's another issue. But we're as long as
Well,
we're
I'm happy to do it anytime. Maybe we'll have a little bit longer show segment. I think an hour might work better than half an hour, but I understand, Cameron, you want to try to, I guess, get it broadcast.
doing this latency of the Zoom thing, but let's we're going to continue to have these discussions as long as there's the national emergency, which we still are under. So right. So see you next time. Thank you for listening and watching Hardfire Media Liberal Discussions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peace and freedom.
Thanks for hosting.
Hey,